In terms of interacting with patients, as a clinical psychologist, you do this obviously every day, and then with physicians or even physical therapists or any of these other providers, we're always trying to work with patients and promote some kind of positive behavioral change. What are tips or advice that you have on encouraging patients to adapt some of these behavioral changes for themselves?
Yeah. So actually, the key word I use is intention. Everything starts with intention. One of my mentors and teachers, Dr. Brian Miller, has a model, the CSERT model, where every step starts with intention. I actually asked Brian that. I said, hey, this sounds like that's easy to intend something. Actually, it's very hard. And he's sneaky because anybody who's familiar with Buddhist Noble Eightfold Path, Mahayana Theravada traditions, the first step is, if I remember correctly, is right intention or right mindset or something like that. And I always thought that was confusing. And it's like, well, I intend to break free of the cycle of death, birth, and resuffering. And I'm like, yeah, it's easy. Like, well, actually, no. It's like true intention is actually really hard, and because it's designed to veer off the path. Now, there are a lot of external things. So like a very key factor one is if you tell people like, hey, I'm going to do this, or, like that actually, we know behaviorally increases it. For physicians and therapists, I recommend the skill set of motivational interviewing, Stephen Miller and Bill Rolnick's tool set. It's the closest we have to being a Jedi. It's so cool. It's like, you do not want to do drugs anymore. I don't want to do drugs. You want to lose weight. I want to lose. So cool. There's now material, if you type in motivational interviewing in Amazon, that it's workbooks for yourself that you can do. And so to increase your own motivation for behavior, and it's all about behavioral change. But a big part of it is looking at ambiguity and ambivalence. So most people aren't like 100, like, I'm never going to stop smoking it. I'll never F you. Some are, but the super majority of people are ambivalent. Scale of 1 to 10, maybe, 1 is heck no, 10 is heck yes, I'm going to quit. I'm about a 3, Adnan. I'm not an idiot. I know smoke. And so it's, how do we do that? And if you can look at it in two ways. One is that ambivalence is really normal and natural, and we don't want to fight it. We want to roll with it. But we also want to, especially as a provider, realize, and this is directly from motivational interviewing, the person is autonomous. That an image my motivational interviewing trainer, Thad Leffingwell, which always stuck with me, was like a tiny ember of a flame. You can, any good or like person who's camped or anything like that can use that to enhance, like they can make that a forest fire, right? That little ember. It's actually that's how California forest fire started as a cigarette, right? It's like yeah, that's a really grim example, but it's like, yeah, that's MI. It's like, use that ember of change because there's something in there that wants them to change. The other part of that is, if you're the one doing the change talk, Adnan, you need to stop smoking, Adnan, you need to stop, then I'm going to be the one like, no, I don't, I'm good. You need to kind of check, enhance like what they want. So that it requires validating, affirming. Affirming doesn't mean agreeing. Just like, yeah, it sounds like, smoking isn't really that deeply problematic. And say that. Tell me more, Mr. Gomez. Look, I have 3 uncles that, died of cancer or something like that. I get it, man. I'm like, dude, I'm not that old. Okay, so it's like maybe later smoking's an issue, but right now you feel pretty comfortable with your lungs. And that, right? And letting them, and just having a free open forum. It's really hard to do that because a lot of the job of a professional, a medical provider, is you tell people what to do. The third and last thing I'll say is there's something called D. Clemente and Prochaska's stages of change model. And a lot of people in the addiction field of medicine are familiar with that. But it talks about most of the techniques we as professionals are taught are in the action stage. Like, Dr. Adnan, I'm ready to quit smoking. What do I do? Patch, Nicorette, what else? You don't need to do MI for that one. It's in the contemplation or pre-contemplation. So here's contemplation. I don't know, Dr. Adnan. Yeah, maybe it's not. I mean, I don't know. It sucks. I mean, I tried 3 times and that was like miserable. I was a bear to everyone. Maybe later, pre-contemplation. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me, Dr. Adnan. I'm good to go. right? There's a story that on Miller and Rolnick talk about first training they did, I think, in the Rhode Island area. It was a physician who just refused to do the MI training until her boss said, you got to do it or you're out. He's like, oh, fine. And she worked with a veteran. She was at the Veterans Administration. And she said, I think for 5 years, she'd work off and on with this guy. And he smoked. And she would do the physician, like, stop smoking. He's like, I'm fine. And she did MI, and her argument was, I don't have time to do MI, right? She only got like 15-minute contact with this person. I don't have time. She did MI training, implemented those skills. Within a month, the man stopped smoking. And at the end of the story, like at a 1-year checkup, he still wasn't. And she was nice enough to film something about herself saying, I used to say I don't have time to do motivational interviewing. I realized as a physician that I don't not have time. I wasted 5 years of that man's life, which I think was a very intellectually deep thing for her to do. And to kind of, like, that's a pretty vulnerable thing for a physician to do. She's like, I was wrong. And I just like always admired that woman for being able to be that transparent. But it's like she was talking about, I work with the ambivalence. I looked at kind of, what their own, like they do have some agency. And I got to realize if they don't want to stop smoking, they're not. But if there's even an ember there, I can expand that. And to make sure that I'm not the one doing the change talk, right? But again, I think even those you can tie into the word intention.
For people that are trying to change themselves, would you recommend kind of doing a motivational interviewing style methodology for themselves? Or is there something else that you'd recommend to kind of enact those positive behavioral changes? Since as you talked about earlier and you brought up, it's so hard to actually intend and even to make those changes.
The way I kind of do just my styles, I start with kind of the external hard behavioral approaches. Like, let's just set a schedule, let's set a plan. Depending on what you're trying to change, that you usually have a lot of support for that. There's a really good book that's still out there called Don't Shoot the Dog, which is just about that, just about the behavioral changes, doing reinforcement cycles, shaping. It's actually pretty effective. And it can be very effective, especially for a smaller term. Now, if this is a goal that you've been working on it, just that behavioral stuff hasn't worked, then I may go to things like that, like MI. And there are now more workbooks. Ironically, the positive psychology stuff we talked about actually focuses a lot on that. The things that make you happier are usually things that are behavioral changes. Your happiness and your behavior are kind of deeply tied in together. So they actually have like the Tal Ben-Shahar's book, Happier, actually kind of goes into that topic of like, what do you need to change in your life right now? Because probably if you're unhappy, if you're changing a behavior, there's some level of unhappiness there, right? Or just discontent at the very least. So all of that stuff kind of ties in together. And so I think those, but again, a very clear, concrete one is, there's actually CBT has a lot of these tools too. So CBT offers you a lot. If you've ever heard of Woebot, Woebot, it's a CBT app that has a little robot. We call him Woebot. And he helps you with this. He helps you with behavior change. And he gives some very concrete things like make it very small. Set yourself a 2-week deadline. So like, I want to lose 20 pounds. Okay, don't get that. That's too big. How about I'm going to start running 3 times a week? That you could probably do by the end of January. And then that obviously ties into your weight loss, right? So instead of these giant goals, let's make them like, you can have that giant goal, but make sure that the one that you're focusing on is the one right in front of you, because that's just psychologically overwhelming if you're thinking about losing 20 pounds. And Woebot helps you with that. It actually goes through that. When you're talking yourself out, he helps talk you back in. It's not an app for that, but it actually, I recommend it to a lot of my kids and adults. And I have to use the things I recommended them. And I found like, oh, wow, he focused for me on behavioral change things, like, being a little bit more timely to stuff, being a little more on the ball on my paperwork, things like that. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. He can help you with anxiety or depression, but it was a really cool, unique tool that I think we have out there that can be used for like teenagers and adults.
So kind of going more into, I guess, the career of clinical psychology again, or even other careers, how do you prevent burnout yourself? And what would you recommend for other healthcare professionals?
I'll kind of talk about that on the continuum, because there's that's kind of the thing I've been talking about most in 2020. I've been asked to talk about most, and I do a lot of training on that. The model I use is called CSERT. Dr. Brian Miller out on the West Coast is the one who developed it. And there's actually an article on this, peer-reviewed article, which if you're interested, we can send it that way. But I look at a spectrum, and I call it, on one end of the spectrum is can't take the heat, on the other end is CSER, and there's a couple of things in between. So the first thing I learned as a professional was the can't take the heat method. And my first day in mental health was at a place called MHMR, it's a community mental health center. I was part of the AmeriCorps program, which some people watch this may know what that is. It's like a local U.S. Peace Corps. So they work recession in Detroit, NOLA after Katrina, gang prevention East LA, things like that. West Texas, it meant indentured servitude to the mental health center. So they said, you're a guy, you get our 2 West divisions, Sunrise Canyon, adult inpatient, children, adolescents. First day in mental health, they pushed me on the floor at the inpatient unit. Like, is this safe, man? Like, 80% sure. 80% that's high, like 87%. Yeah, and I was freaked out. Not the first month I was there, but the second month, I worked swing shift like 3 to lights out and a little after. I was like early 20s at that time. Guy my age at the time, early 20s, spent 60 minutes. It was like an hour before lights out, talking about the graphic details of his physical abuse by his father. I'm clocking out, I'm glazed over. Dissociation is the technical term for that particular iteration of burnout. And not my boss, but it was a senior staff. I always remember this guy because he had rank and he was fine as a person, but here's the interaction. And this is can't take the heat. He taught me this. Yo, man, what's up? You okay? I was like, yo, man, I don't know what to do with this. Man, this guy got this heat out of hand. Dog, I don't know what to do with this, man. And I'll never forget the wisdom he gave me that day. You think you got it tough, man. You get beat for 10 years, walk yourself, be a professional. I was like, okay, it didn't seem weird. It really didn't. Can't think he get out of the kitchen. Suck it up, buttercup. And I didn't think that was weird. And I ran into, by the way, I was a PhD before I learned how to deal with burnout and secondary trauma. Secondary trauma you see also like in first responders, right? Like, they work, more, you're seeing it in Washington, D.C. right at this moment because, they have just gone through a trauma, right? And so, yeah, I thought, and the reason I probably my own upbringing, I was raised by like ex-Marines or ex-Army uncles, and I could never complain to my tíos growing up. I was like, yo, tío, man, I had a hard day, man. Oh, yeah, mijito? Yeah. I was in Vietnam, Da Nang, 69. Were you there? I was like, I wasn't born in 1969. It's like, Marines don't make excuses, mijito. I was like, never mind. I could complain about nothing growing up, right? And so I went my whole career just like that. Can't take the heat. Burnout, secondary trauma, that is actually really badly reinforced. A lot like anorexia. Like, oh my God, you lost so much weight. What are you doing? Right? It's like super. And I saw it that was an explicit form. I'll give you an implicit form. Okay. Right now, I'll give you an implicit form of can't take the heat ideology. Okay, ready? So Adnan, I've been doing this job in the trauma field for about 20 years, Adnan. Is it kind of better than you? I mean, like, shit, I'm a doctor, dude. See those books, Adnan? See him? Kind of written those. I say he's national child. I'm like one of the staring. Not bragging, Adnan. I'm a badass. Just saying, I'm tougher than you, Adnan, right? You just gotta get tough like me, Adnan, to be successful, right? Okay, here's what we've actually found in the science. Between you and me, the person who's been doing this a long time, the person who hasn't, you are going to be way better at this. You're going to be so much radically better at dealing with your burnout and secondary trauma than I am. Here's why. First, you don't have as many bad habits to unlearn as I did. I had over a decade, and I'm still unlearning them, by the way. Second, if you're like, let's say you're a student, right? Or let's say you're not a trauma therapist, right? You screw up in that setting. What do? I'm an idiot. I don't know. I need to let you do the student thing. Like, I don't know anything. Yeah. So you're more open to new ideas. What do I do when I screw up? Right before Christmas, had a kid cut, like suicidal. Their suicidality escalated. I tore into myself for an hour until one of my accountability partners called me out on it. It's like, how did you fucking miss this? Stupid, man. How did you miss this? You should have done the safety plan. How did you? I just ripped myself a new one for like an hour in my brain. And I know not to do that, right? And so there's no amount of toughness, right? So like, if, there's no like amount of like toughness that'll get you over Ebola, right? It's like, and I've been at the CDC for 20 years. I'm a healthy guy, strong immune. Yeah, you're about to bleed out of every orifice in your body, man. There's an Ebola outbreak here, right? So we take that off the table immediately. Right? So can't take the heat is a complete myth, period. You next run into self-care, and in the C-STAR model, we're not anti-self-care. Our position is self-care is neither necessary nor sufficient to deal with burnout or secondary trauma. So basically, you're doing yoga and it's working, please continue. If you're not doing yoga, please don't start. You like green tea, drink green tea. You don't like green tea, don't drink green tea. It's not going to help. It's not necessary or sufficient. There's a conceptual and empirical reason. So here's an empirical reason. One study, it's not a super sophisticated study, but it was peer reviewed. They looked at was medical students actually, and they looked at burnout. And they had 3 groups. Control group was group 1. Group 2 was self-care. Here's what they told group 3. Do something. That was it. Like, okay, here's the results. Group 1, control, no change. Group 3, the do something group, actually got a little better, but it wasn't statistically significant, like P of 0.14. The self-care group got worse. Here's why. Adnan, did you do your self-care for today? I didn't do my self-care today, and I was late to Dr. Gomez's meeting, and I effed that up too, and I'm effing up. It's one more thing on an already stressed out individual. It's just another box check. I didn't organically integrate it into your day-to-day and your skill set and your life problems. So it stresses you out. Okay. Here's the conceptual reason. Let's say you are a attending physician, Adnan, at a PICU UC Davis Health. Okay. I'm an MS3. I knock on your door, say, hey, can I check in with you? Yeah, Michael, what's up? Well, Adnan, remember that kid before Christmas we saw here at PICU? Yeah, 6-year-old rape survivor. Yeah, that was a rough day. Just want to check in, man. How are you doing, Michael? Yeah, no, I'm not gonna love with you, man. I haven't been doing too well. Can't sleep. I'm having nightmares. Your face kind of pops in my head when I don't want it to. Angry. All the bit my girlfriend's head off, and I don't know. I just bit her head off. Dude. I'm kind of freaking out here, and I don't know what to do, man. And you, as a good attending physician, you've rejected, can't take the heat, and next thing you run into is self-care. It's like you recommend self-care. You say, Michael, this is a very common reaction given what we deal here and pick you. It says nothing about you or your skill as a physician. It says everything about the horrific awfulness of child trauma and the things we see day to day in ICU. It checks out. It's Friday, dude. It's fine. How about take the rest of the day off, take Monday off, go home, hang out with a girlfriend, walk your dog, go for a run, watch a movie, do some self-care, recharge your battery, man. I'm sure you'll be fine by Tuesday. Don't worry. And compared to walk it off and suck it up, Buttercup is damn near enlightened, right? And it is. Here's the conceptual problem why self-care, we stay away from that in the CSERT model, and we don't recommend that for burnout. Let's say you are a family medicine physician, board certified family medicine physician, UC Davis Health, okay? And you get a 20-year-old sophomore from UC Davis named Janie come into your clinic. Says, Dr. Adnan, ever since my ex raped me before Christmas, I haven't been doing so well, Dr. Adnan. I can't sleep. I have nightmares. His face kind of pops in my head when I don't want it to. I'm angry all the time. I bit my roommate's head off, Dr. Adnan. I just bit her head off, and I'm kind of freaking out here, doctor, and I don't know what to do. And you, as a licensed board certified family physician, say, Janie, that is a very common reaction post-sexual assault. It says absolutely nothing about you. It says everything about the horrific awfulness and trauma being raped. I'll tell you what, it's Friday. Semester hasn't even started at Davis. I mean, how about this? Okay, I'll write you a note, giving you a Monday off if you have work or something. Hang out with your roommate, walk your dog, go for a run, watch a movie, do some self-care, just recharge your battery. I'm sure you'll be fine by Tuesday. Now it sounds, I think it actually is in California, a licensure violation. Now it sounds brutal and cruel and ridiculous, right? We do a full day training for the CSERT model, and I drag this out. I'll give you the short version right now. DSM, ICD, post-traumatic stress disorder criterions, B, C, D, E, F domains. Those are identical human beings, right? Janie and your MS3. If we put Janie and the medical student under an fMRI machine, their neurology would light up almost identically, probably. So why do we treat them so radically different? And the technical answer is criterion A. You didn't, Janie got right. You didn't. You're just a doctor, right? Here's the more blunt answer. Ready? Dude, it's your job. Okay? You went to school for this. You get paid for this. You get licensed this. And I don't put a gun to your head to walk into that exam room. I mean, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, Adnan, you kind of put yourself in that scenario. I mean, we're going to be totally blunt about it. I mean, it's kind of walked in there. You kind of did. Adnan, what were you wearing when you did medicine? What were you wearing, Adnan? Right. It's victim blaming. Now, it's super subtle and almost never intentional, but it's a variant of victim blaming. And it's a more insidious victim blaming than it appears at first sight. because here, so let's say I, as a psychologist, as a doctor, whatever I am in the role, let's say I'm your supervisor, Adnan, and I recommend self-care for your burnout. And let's say it doesn't, if we get lucky, it works, but let's say it doesn't work, which is very, very likely, right? Um, that not being sarcastic, not being glib, I swear to God, this is your best case scenario. If self-care doesn't work, Michael's an idiot, freaking idiot, doesn't know what he's doing. That really is no sarcasm at all. The best case. Here's the worst case and the more likely case. You try the self-care recommendation, go home, go for a run, hang out with your girlfriend, whatever. Here is what you're more likely to do. Dr. Gomez is, a smart guy. He knows, trauma. He knows this. He's worked with this a lot. I mean, he wouldn't recommend something I wouldn't work. So I'm the problem. Adnan's the problem. Right? You victim blame yourself. That's why. So in the CSRT model, we believe that self-care is a high risk, low reward strategy. So we tend to stay away. It's maximum 10% of the model. Post-pandemic conversation I had on Zoom with Dr. Miller was essentially, he talked about the deterioration of self-care. Most of your standard self-care strategies pre-pandemic blew up. Go to the gym. Can't go to the gym. Go hang out at a bar. Get like none of those will work in the pandemic world, right? And so, and we never recommended those, or they were a maximum 10% recommendation in the CSRT model. So going forward, if the people watching this or you yourself have this is really new stuff, I've never heard of this, get this following book, Trauma Stewardship, Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, Trauma Stewardship. A book also that's good to get, written by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, is Age of Overwhelm. She has some really cool things about and observations about burnout, secondary trauma. For example, boredom, being bored is a stress response. We actually want to monitor if you're boredom. Here's why. You've never said this. Michael, it's Friday. After this meeting, get to go home, get to get bored. It's going to be great. Right. No one said, no, you don't say it. That's weird. It's like, hey, what are you doing after this? And I get to chill, man. I get to kick back, get to relax. That's not bored. So boredom is a low-level stress response, but low-level secondhand smoke can get real toxic real fast over a short amount of time, right? Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky talks about that. She talks about stress. You do not lower your stress, you metabolize your stress, which goes into the CSRT model. But so if people watching this or yourself are like, this is really new stuff for me, Trauma Stewardship, and I would recommend and Age of Overwhelm. Now, the CSRT model is the one we use, which was developed by Dr. Brian Miller, also in conjunction with Jenny Sprang over at Utah and Kentucky. And there's an article for it, a peer-reviewed article. And it's the one we implement a lot, and I've done a lot. And I do myself. The crappy thing about this model is I got to do it too, and I don't want to do it. It's hard. It's like running and weightlifting. But it's a really clunky acronym, but I'm going to briefly break it down. It's components for enhancing clinician engagement. And clinician is a placeholder. It can be physician, teacher, social worker, law enforcement, child welfare. It's just a placeholder. It was we thought as clinicians no one would care about it, but apparently people are getting burned out in every discipline. Components for enhancing clinician engagement and reducing trauma. And it's 2 pillars. So since secondary traumatic stress and burnout looks spooky similar to PTSD, we have very little data on how to intervene in secondary trauma, but since they look and act very similar, we have half a century of great PTSD treatment. So what I wouldn't tell Janie is take a bubble bath and go watch a movie. I'd say, Janie, we have an app on your phone, if you download it with your Droid or iPhone, called the PTSD Coach. I know you said you're having trouble sleep. So when you're not able to sleep, I want you to boot up that app and go through it and find, by this time next week at our session, find 3 tools that look good, that things you could probably use day to day and that you use them pretty quick and that they wouldn't interfere with what you're doing. Right? So in CSRT, we'd call that parasympathetic recovery. So like diaphragmatic breathing, like progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness. Okay, 5 things I can see. 1, 2, 4 things I feel on my body. 4, 3 things I hear. 2 things I smell. 1 thing, like we do actual in the pocket strategies. Those took less than a minute combined, right? And we want you to, just like UFC fighters get a minute break, you should get a minute break too. You can 60 seconds, right? So similar process. However, if all I do is tape you up and push you to your next exam room, that's pretty messed up. Because in the CSER model, we have a radical thought, and I just want you to go with me. It's a very radical idea, and I apologize, but it's controversial. You might want to enjoy your job. It's shocking. You might want to like being a physician. I mean, a weird thought, but you want to enjoy your job. And that other pillar is positive psychology. And so Dr. Miller's genius is combined both of those. And so this is also why in the CSERT model, high stress is not your enemy. Dr. Miller cites a lifelong research study where basically they looked at an XY axis. Axis X for the group in the research study was how high is your stress this week? Low, moderate, high. The Y-axis is how negative or harmful or helpful stress. Highly negative, neutral, highly positive. Spoiler alert, they reviewed the death records. It got dark real fast, sorry. 98% of us will die at some point in our lives, Adnan. That's just a medical fact. Not me, but like most people out there, but 98% as well. And so here's what they found. The people who had the highest mortality, the shortest lifespan was the high stress group, but only if they had a highly negative attribution of stress. They thought stress was very toxic. The people with the longest lifespan was the high stress group, high positive attribution of stress. Stress was their friend. Stress focused them, made them better. They lived longer than both low stress groups. Right? So take a scale of stress. 1 is very low, 10 is maximum. But take a second scale of the personal control of Adnan as Adnan, Michael is Michael. Not control of your program, not control of your partner, not control of this pandemic, you as you. One phrase we use a lot in CBT is all control is self-control, is where it starts and where it stops. And so if I say, Adnan, can you be stressed at a 9, but in control of yourself at a 9? Yeah, LeBron in a playoff game. And there's some settings where if your stress drops below a 5, you're probably going to mess up. If you're working ER, ICU, crisis response, you're living in, a high community violence, you're, in high systemic racism, like, you're in like Southside Chicago or something, or, South Park, Texas, Houston, you shouldn't let your stress drop below a 5. So in the CSERT model, you'll never hear us to tell you, you just need to calm down. You need to relax, Adnan. You need to de-stress. We'll never tell you, you got to calm down. We'll never Taylor Swift you. You need to calm down. Just calm down. We'll never do that because that skill isn't the important thing. So if I say, Adnan, check me in, stress and personal control, 8 and 10, good to go. But on the flip side, stress and personal control, 4 and 2. My question now is not how can I help with your stress, but Adnan, is there any way or what ways can I help you gain more personal control in this moment in space-time? Because the key thing for burnout is it's not stress that gets you. It's stress combined with helplessness and hopelessness. If anyone has watched The Never-Ending Story, it's the swamp of sadness that gets you. Okay. And I still hate that movie because why would you lead your horse? Atreyu, you're an idiot, man. Why would you do? I still think about that. Or maybe if he thought about that, the horse would still be dead. I'm still mad, obviously. And so it's the hopelessness, helplessness that gets you, not the stress. If you like with a lot of technique. Now, a good example of a very CSERT consistent book is a book called Hijacked by Your Brain. It was written by one of my mentors, Dr. Julian Ford, who has forgotten more about how to deal with stress than most of us learn. And it has what's called the Freedom Steps, which is a graduate course in how to do metabolization, how to break down your stress so it doesn't get too toxic. Because it's not having the stress, it's like, what do you do with it, right? And so that's really the thing. And so Hijacked by Your Brain, Julian Ford, John Wertheim, is a plain English, very easy one. So that if you get trauma stewardship, Age of Overwhelm, and Hijacked by Your Brain, I do not get any reimbursement for this, by the way. None of these. I get no money for this. It's a full disclosure. I get nothing for this. It's just, those are some really good answers to burnout, secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, all those terms.
Okay. Those are some good recommendations. I'll try to link them down below for the viewers. Going back again to just kind of general psychology, how has psychology changed since you started and where do you see it going in the future? You mentioned some things like it moving from kind of like general, like positive, I guess, improvement. And some of it's like core, like foundational values to maybe more like therapeutic focus. And then now it's moving back again. What other changes have you noticed and what do you see happening in the next few decades?
I think one of the, and I'm probably very critical of psychology and clinical psych specifically, just because, you don't like your brother or sister, right? But To give credit where credit's due, I think the field of psychology is much more focused on diversity. I'll give a concrete example. Dr. Michael Dariano, Medical University of South Carolina, brilliant practitioner, brilliant therapist. He is quarterbacking a lot of the diversity inclusion for MUSC. And they're very serious about it. And he's very serious about it. And it wasn't surprising, especially Michael's a logical pick because he's brilliant and very capable. But I was like, oh yeah, we do that. Like that used to not be it. Like, oh yeah, there was like, hey, you're just smart or not. And it's like, no, it's, there's things that prevent people of color, people of, like Latinx background, people, I'm first generation, by the way. In my family, if you don't go to prison, you hit the mountaintop. So I overshot a tiny bit at on. And so things like the McNair Scholars Program, shout out to McNair, all McNair scholars watching, because that's how I got into grad school. I would not have without McNair, period. And I'm very vocal about that. And so I think a lot of those combination of things like trio programs, it's like psychology, I think, is seeking those out and wants more diversity, both like LGBTQ diversity, non-binary, neurodiversity. But it's still like, what's the stat? Like, I think 4% of psychologists are African-American. We need to fix that. And I'm hoping that the conversations about inclusion and diversity are serious. I do think they are. I have no reason to think they're not. And so I think that field, I'm hoping like in 15, 20 years, it'll be a much different look, kind of like I actually get Congress, United States Congress is the most diverse Congress in the history of the United States. And I think psychology kind of is following like a similar thing of like, oh, there's a lot of white guys in this bill. And now it's, there's some Latinx people here, there's women, there's women of color, and I think I just feel deeply that is a very, very important thing in psychology. And I think they are taking it seriously. I also think the focus on pathology will always be there because we're clinical, it's what we do. But this wider focus on not just how do we fix pathology, but how do we not survive, but thrive also. And I think that's been kind of a banner call. And I think the other thing I've seen shift, and I think it's becoming more, but it's actually relatively new, is what we were just talking about, is being more kind to our trainees and to our psychologists. Like, burnout is a legitimate problem. It's not that you're weak, it's that I think the pandemic has really highlighted that, in the sense of, yeah, we all have a trauma now, period. Those of us who had trauma before the pandemic are like, oh, yeah, we know. Yeah. And it actually was highlighted in some weird ways by patient population. So you may have seen articles during the pandemic like, PTSD is my superpower, depression is my superpower. People who went through CBT training or DBT training, like they were at therapy, basically talking about, yeah, I'm pretty messed up, man. I had my own childhood trauma, or I have anxiety, but I'm good during the pandemic. Whereas my neurotypical friends are freaking out. It's like, well, because I'm using my mindfulness skills that I learned from my DBT therapist. Yeah, like DBT is a powerful set of tools for tolerating distress, especially when you can't like resolve it. There's no fixing this. CBT can be a tool. TFCBT can be powerful. Target, ARC, CPP, PCI, like all of these treatments we talk about. And I'm really, I kind of, to put a punctuation mark, I'm seeing, and I want to just give a shout out, National Child Traumatic Stress Network is where I think I see this the best, well done, and the most intentional and compassionate, is how do we integrate lived experience for the people we work with, families and like children and parents, without tokenistic like bias. And I probably am biased because I'm a big fan of NCTSN. I think they do it very, very well and take it very seriously. And so, for example, I do have my own lived experience. I have my own child trauma history. I'm a doctor now. That's a very different experience than being a 20-year-old kid who went through foster care in Boston for most of their life. I need them because I've lost a little bit of perspective. It's been like a long time since I was a kid. Like, and I've been a doctor for quite a while now. So I have not to discount the perspective, but it's a different one. And so we need that collaboration between the older guard and the younger guard, and to be able to have that dialogue. And I think National Child Traumatic Stress Network does it extremely well. And so that incorporation of lived experience, youth voice, family voice, parent voice, patient neurodiversity voices of people with autism and ID, that's LGBTQ, especially people of color, is actually being taken much more seriously than I've ever seen it as a psychologist, or even as a person who has lived experience. And it's probably the thing that makes me have a lot more faith in the future of our field.
So the pandemic you mentioned has led to some changes in terms of like trauma and things like that, or at least people's experiences with trauma. And on the medical side of things, it's also led to a lot of changes as well, and maybe expedited some changes that would have happened maybe in the next few decades. For example, with telemedicine. What role has telemedicine had in psychology, and what does it have? And do you see it expanding in the future or going back to more of an in-person type of situation?
One of my colleagues on the East Coast said it best, and I completely agree with him, that it's here to stay. It's just if it expands, how it expands, not if it expands. And especially in places like West Texas, where I'm from, we were trying to do that like in 2015. We're getting a lot of pushback because they didn't see the point of it. But like we have an entirely rural area, and so tele made sense. And so when the pandemic hit, it took us less than a month to transition, not because we're just really awesome. I think my team is really awesome, but it's more of like, oh, we had that set up a while back. And so it's just a couple of things, whereas a lot of people struggle, took them well into the summer, late summer to fully do that. But I think it's here to stay. And I think there was a study done, I can't remember which modality, but it looked at it. It was a CBT base, but they looked at how comfortable are the kids, the parents, and the therapists with this teleformat for CBT. And it was interesting because in order of most comfortable, like they liked it the most to least comfortable, kids, parents, therapists. We hated it, like, because it's not natural. We got it. And it's like, kids are like, no, this is so much nicer. Like, it's like I'm on the camera all the time anyway. So the kids felt it was working better, whereas we therapists thought no, but the kids, like, it's really what the kids say, right? Because they're the patients, what the patients say. And Esther Devlinger, one of our developers for TSVT, says it won't be appropriate for everybody, and she's right. And so we still, just like some outpatient therapy won't be appropriate for everybody. Like standard family medicine won't be appropriate for everybody. They need a specialist for certain things. So that's not a knock against tele, but some people are kind of interpreting that, which I think is erroneous. But I think it will expand. I think there are some of the cooler initiatives. So like one I'm very, very, very proud to be involved in is the complex trauma, developmental trauma disorder, site at University of Connecticut, run by Dr. Julian Ford, Rocio Chang Angola. And they're working with Ed Wisberbeck. He's a theater teacher at University of Connecticut, and they're using actors and like people who are trained actors, undergrad, to show these digital diaries and show like, here's what it looks like to be a patient. And it's going to be very interactive. And you can also see what do the therapists say about this kid, about Billy? So like, how does the process of therapy work? Because it's very mystical for most people. We as good therapists think, no, it shouldn't be. Like if someone asked you like, so Adnan, what is asthma treatment? Like, oh, you should know that. It's like, wait, what, is that like illegal for you to say? Like, yeah, it should be. Like, no, if you ask me like, what happens in there? Just the questions you've been asking. A big motivation where I do interviews like this is because I know a lot of therapists like, well, it's mystical. What they really say is like, I actually don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, no, it's, it should be very transparent, just like any other thing, healing art. I spent time in Oklahoma, and there's a lot of tribal populations, and a lot of them are very, very open to like their healing arts if you ask very nicely. I was like, oh, you have like a system for this indigenous healing art. And like, yeah, you should. Like we spent a couple of millennia developing it. It was like, that makes sense, but why wouldn't a counselor do the same thing, right? And so I think that is those formats, that's going to be an entirely digital format done with like trained actors and a very, very skilled. Ed is such a wonderful a theater teacher and just a very good mind for this. And it's like completely not what we would standardly do. And that's intentional because we want to reach more people through a digital means. So the future is digital. The future is in media, and it always has been. And I think some of the older guard have thought that, and I never knew why. That never made sense to me. Now, I don't get technology very well, but I better learn. Like I have to learn stuff. That's part of what we have to do as we age. But I think it's here to stay, and I think the patients are happy with it. But obviously, it's not appropriate for everybody. But you can say that about anything.
Would you change any aspect of your career so far, or like go into a different field or different area of psychology, or maybe even not do a healthcare field, or are you pretty content with where you're at?
Yeah, I had this question asked. Kind of, especially there was a career change I had. I was in psychology, just a site change, and it wasn't pleasant. It was in the 2020 year, and I usually deflect with humor. So I'm like, yeah, I'd be a guitarist. So it's like, you know how to play guitar? Nah, don't. I'll figure it out. That's how I usually answer that question, and it's a complete dodge. But one of my really good friends asked me this very directly. He's like, well, do you regret being a psychologist? Do you regret doing trauma work? Do you regret, doing this path? And he's like, you had to do a lot of work. You had to leave all your family for like a decade and change. And he's like, it's hard. It's been a hard kind of, road, right? It hasn't been played. And then you deal with trauma. So and so that's a legitimate question about it, the kind of question you're asking. And here's my reply, which I think applies to your question and hopefully answers it. My exact verbatim statement to my friend was, you know what? I think I have sacrificed everything in my life for my career and for where I'm at and to help the kids and families I've helped. I think I've sacrificed literally everything. But I don't think I missed out on anything. I have seen things that most people wouldn't believe. Not bad, but good. I've been in the middle of an F5 tornado site. I've seen Muslim people identify as Muslim and Southern Baptist and Jewish working together, lifting rubble, giving water to people. Anyone ask their faith. I've seen that. I've seen, SWAT team officers carry a kid out of a meth house and then you're going to be okay, little kids. I've seen therapists walk into Parkwood Stonewall Heights and walk out with blood on their sneakers and do this. And, I've gotten to work with some of the most brilliant minds of my generation, like Barbara Bonner, Susan Schmidt, Mark Chaffin, Julian Ford, Rosita Chang, Ernestine Briggs, Kit, like Tony Manarino, Judy Cohen, Esther, I just keep going on, and I've been so honored by that. I don't think I deserve that honor. I was called trash from East Lubbock growing up. I don't deserve that. And I got that. And that is, damn, I'm going to trade that for anything, man. That's the coolest thing in the world, man. It's been a roller coaster. God damn, it's been fun, man. I have sacrificed literally everything about myself in my life, but I've missed nothing. Not one thing. Wouldn't trade it for a thing. And so that was my answer to him. It's like, yeah, it's hard, but I have missed a thing.
How has becoming a psychologist changed your personal perspectives besides helping you handle trauma and things like that?
First, it's changed my perspective in the sense of demystified it. I'm like, oh, most doctors don't know what they're doing. That's okay. It's just like they try, they want to work with you, collaborate. But it's also, I think I have this misconception that you're gonna have it all figured out if you get a PhD, and it's like, oh, that's not even close to true. But I think it's also I think probably to answer your direct question, Adnan, I think people who don't know me or just know me professionally say, well, you seem very calm, very centered, very compassionate, very intelligent. I'm like, that's not me. I do not start off, and I still don't think I am fundamentally kind, or I think I'm kind of angry. I think I'm a hothead. I think, I fly a lot, I think I can, I don't think I'm like mean or something, but hey, I'm going to call you out on if you're talking, man, I'm going to call you out on it, man. And, and it's so I grew up in this way with this, and so I'm like, yeah, I still think that way, but I think the profession has made me more empathetic, that I judge less. And now having been a psychologist and trained as one, because I realized that it's not that I know what you've been through, brother. It's more of I will never know what it is like to be a 24-year-old African-American woman who is addicted to crack and was raped by her father. I never will. So I can never judge you. You can't beat your kid and you have to get clean, but that's different. Holding you accountable is different than judging you. And so I find that so I'll give you a concrete example. So I was having professional and interpersonal problems with an administrator in my last job, and I still dislike this man. If you have that dry mouth taste at the back of your throat, right? That's what he is as a person. And so I was just enraged every time I knew. I was like, not that I was afraid. I was like, I'm going to hit him. That might happen today. And I'll lose my job. And then also the students will see it. It's a bad example as a teacher. And so I was just angry. And I used some of my training, and part of it was there's a Winston Churchill quote that says you can compromise on anything except your principles, and when you compromise on your principles, it's called surrender. And that quote I've used in with trauma, tell me what you think that means. And I click what does this man had to compromise on or surrender? in his lifetime. He probably didn't start there, maybe even started idealistic, like I can change this, but now he's totally like massive part of the problem in like just, doing not just like wrong stuff, but like illegal stuff, and also being a jerk about it. That has to be a type of hell. I can't imagine having to surrender so many times in one's life, much less one time, but like over and over for years and years. And the story and losing yourself, like, God, that's got to be a type of hell. I wouldn't wish that on not even him, not on my worst enemy. That's got to be hell. And when that just diffused all the kind of rage I had about this as a person and as a professional, as an aside, it really made him angry because I would come in very calm, like, you know what, I disagree with your position, but I'm going to still be doing, the right thing and the ethical thing. And just want to tell you that, I'm sorry that this is your position. It sounds like which was a different attitude than just gritted teeth talking to this man. And it really made him upset. And I was like, okay, cool, this is working. I didn't mean for that, but it just like basically the short version is if you'd asked me in my 20s, like I would have told you empathy is a weakness. Empathy is BS. I was very wrong on that. And I think the muscle of empathy, like anyone who does Brene Brown out there, that's exactly what this is all she talks about. And she's a brilliant mind. I'm like, yeah. But I don't think I wired as an empathetic person. And I'll put a dot on this real quick. The point of this is there's a story I think told about Mahatma Gandhi. And it's kind of a parable. I don't know if it's true or not or apocryphal, but walking down the street, in India, doing what he does. And I sees these two men, soot covered, running towards him. He says, Mahatma, great one. We ran from the truth. We ran from them. They burned our village and we ran. So we were nonviolent like you spoke about. And essentially Gandhi says, you cowards. You are cowards. And you're like, what do you mean we ran? And he's like, and this is the point. He's like, the angry man can be nonviolent because nonviolence is the highest form of strength, but the coward will never be nonviolent because cowardness is weakness. You deserted your families and your friends and your village. You are cowards. Angry men can become nonviolent. They can be truly strong and nonviolent. Satiraha is the truest form of strength. And that kind of resonates with me. And I don't think I got that when I first read that in my youth, but I think the profession helped me realize like why that is strength and how that is strength. And, and I think it's anchored in the nucleic is empathy towards that. That's what's nucleic to it. And I think that's helped. I've had a lot of really good teachers and I thank them for that. And I think my patients every therapist will say it and it's true. Patients really helped me with that too, just seeing their struggles.
So last question for today. How do you become a good clinical psychologist or even just a great healthcare provider?
If you can do the following and do it genuinely, you will be a really good psychologist. I don't know, but I will find out. That's it. Like, I think as clinical psych sometimes meets and think of it like medical school. The greatest sin is saying, I don't know. As a good psychologist, a good healthcare provider, that's the greatest virtue is I don't know, but I'll find out. And also, if you want to be a really good one, I don't know, but I will find out. Would you be okay with us doing that together? Like make it a journey, make it a collaboration, not like it's not like and I think we get in this expert role and I think sometimes we need to, but that can be very toxic for the healing process. I think being an eternal student is a second important part of that. And not just like in your field, like please keep reading articles, keep reading books, but also read things that aren't related to psychology. Read things, read sci-fi, read, like I want to read Shakespeare. When I never read Don Quixote, great. I think this, one of the best psychologists I've ever seen in my career was one of my mentors, Dr. Gary Fireman, who's over at Suffolk in Boston. He's just like the paradigmatic example of like the perpetual student and like it's what did Plato say? All philosophy begins in wonder. That's what I think whenever I think of Gary Fireman is like, he just has this wonder about, and everything is exciting and God, that must be a cool way to live. Like, look at this. So like, and just this eternal curiosity. And I think those two really do go together. Like, I don't know, but I'll find out or let's find out. And expanding the limits and knowing that, so the way I concretely do that is every year I'm in training for another modality or another thing I'm doing. And that's not because I want to get notches on my belt. It's because there's something about being a student that makes you very humble. Because it's really easy of like, Adnan, here's what you would do in a trauma focus. I can get arrogant real quick that way. But if I'm a student, like I completely screw that up. Like, cool. Which goes to the last thing is something my grandpa told me, and I may have said this already, is your job in life, perhaps your only job in life, is the following: make your mistakes as fast as humanly possible. That's it. I think what did Einstein say? Failure is success in progress, right? That's it. Like, make your mistakes, have fun making them. You won't make the big ones because you're worried about it. Like one of my philosophy professors said, anxiety is the hallmark of ethical thinking. Those who worry about doing the right thing usually do, right? And so make those mistakes, have fun making them. Know that that's success in progress. Like, and, and I think good teachers, good supervisors, and I try to set this up as a supervisor and trainer is I wanted to create an environment where you feel you can F up, man. That's actually basic attachment theory. Like kids can fall down and screw up and like mommy's still like, oh, I still got you, sweetheart. And I think that we never need to stop that. But, I don't know, but I'll find out. Can we do that together? This perpetual curiosity, eternal student, and make your mistakes as fast as humanly possible. I think if you get all three of those down, you'll be really well set up to be a really good provider, a really good, effective healthcare provider. And I think it'll set you up to do that throughout your whole career.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Gomez, for being a part of this interview.
No problem. Thank you, Adnan. I appreciate the time for being able to talk so much. Thank you.
Thank you guys again so much for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care.